Okay, it's a pleasure to be able to share some words of Torah with all of you in anticipation of this Shabbos Parashat Reeh, Shabbos Mevarchim, Chodesh Elul, a very special time in our calendar. In our Parsha, Moshe reminds us that Hashem places before us a system of law that has the potential to bring us closer to Him or to drive us away. A system that includes reward and punishment, a system that can yield great blessing and positivity in our lives or great challenge. But a system that is absolutely predicated upon one basic principle, and that is free choice. Hashem places before us the choice of how we want to live and how we want to manifest the mandate which Hashem gives us in order to act a certain way. And He supports, encourages, and elevates us from the sidelines to make the right choices, as challenging as that sometimes might be. Hashem believes wholeheartedly in our potential to lead the right kind of life. This is evident from the phrasing of the blessings and the curses in our parsha. When it comes to the blessings, the Torah says, Es habracha asher tishmu mitzvos Hashem Elokechem. The blessing will come when you listen to the commandments of Hashem, your God. However, when it comes to the curses, the Torah says, V'haklala im lo tishmu mitzvos Hashem Elokechem. The curses will come if you don't listen to the mitzvos of Hashem. Asher means it will happen. Im means it might happen. It's as if the Torah is telling us that we will certainly listen and do the right thing. Asher tishmu. But that it is possible. Im lo tishmu. It is possible that we will sometimes do the wrong thing because as flawed human beings, we might falter from our default course, which is normally a good one. The million-dollar question for us is how we stay on the right course and prevent ourselves from falling off the path that we wish to be on. There are innumerable answers to this question, many of which I'm sure I will address in the Drashos of Elul the coming weeks, for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Shabbos Shuvah, a classic topic for this time of year. Today I'd like to suggest just one approach, which I think we can see illustrated in an oddity of the conjugation in the first pasuk of our parsha. The pasuk opens with the words, Reeh, Anochi nosein lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. See that I place before you today blessing and curse. One of the classic questions raised on this pasuk is why re'eh, to see, is in the singular, addressing the individual, and yet lifnechem, before you, is in the plural, addressing the collective body of the Jewish people. The pasuk should have either said re'u in plural, Anochi nosein lifnechem in plural, or it should have said re'eh in singular, Anochi nosein lefanecha, before you in singular, hayom bracha uklala. Why is it that Hashem begins to speak to the individual and then transitions within the same utterance to addressing the collective? The Vilna Gaon explains that Moshe Rabbeinu addresses the individual within the collective as if to say to each person, just because those around you are going in a certain way in life or making certain kinds of decisions, it doesn't mean that you must or should blindly follow, since you're an individual. You are part of the collective, but you are your own individual. Re'eh, you as an individual must see that you are responsible to check and investigate the actions of those around you and only then decide whether to follow them or not. According to the Vilna Gaon, the pasuk is stressing that the individual sometimes must withdraw slightly from the collective in order to maintain their integrity to the laws of the Torah and to the path which they wish to follow. The Kliyakar, who lived in the 16th, 17th century in Prague, presents a slightly different interpretation of the discrepancy in conjugation, which I believe actually complements the Vilna Gaon's idea quite well and rounds out the idea to give us a fuller picture of what we're supposed to gain from this pasuk. He says, Re'eh kimidaber liyachid, lifnechem kimidaber l'rabim. You notice his Re'eh is in the singular, lifnechem is in the plural. Why does the Torah do that? Lefisha amru Chazal, because Chazal tell us in the Gemara in Kiddushin, La'olam yidme Adam ki'ilu haya kol ha'olam mechza al mechza zechuyos ve'avonos asa mitzvah achas yechriyas atzma v'skol ha'olam l'kaf zuchos. It's paraphrasing, those aren't exact words of the Gemara, but the Gemara basically suggests that a person should always view themselves as if any one individual action they take can push the entirety of the world over to the side of merit or chas v'shalom over to the other side. Any one individual action of one person can tip the scales and the balances for the entire world. What the Kliyakar is pointing to in quoting this Gemara is that he's telling us from the inclusion of an address to the individual within the address to the collective, we learn that the perfection of the collective is dependent upon the betterment of every individual. And that's really what the Gemara in Kiddushin is telling us. It's as if the Torah and the Gemara is addressing every one of us and saying, you want to live a more perfect life? You want to live in a more perfect society and world and community? Begin by improving yourself and your own choices. And that will naturally raise up the level of all around you. You sometimes can't change all of society, but you can change yourself. And by doing so, it can actually have a ripple effect and influence upon the rest of the world. Putting the Vilna Gaon's approach together with that of the Kliyakar, I think we can see that the Torah is reinforcing the potential for change that an individual can bring about not just in themselves, but in their surroundings. If a person carefully analyzes their deeds, they will sometimes see that the direction of the collective is not a positive one and decide to act differently, like the Vilna Gaon suggests. But in doing so, they don't really break away from the collective or divorce themselves from the collective or reject the collective, but rather, as the Kliyakar points out, begin to improve it one step, one action, and one person at a time. In answer to our original question, one of the ways in which we as individuals can help ourselves to choose the path of blessing, of bracha, laid out before us, is to remember the interplay we each have with the collective. There are times when the collective can be of help to us, influencing us, and pushing us in the right direction. There are other times when we must be discerning and wary about the influence of the collective if it has the potential to lead us astray. In that latter moment, where we decide to be discerning, where we decide to act differently, we have to remind ourselves that even when we decide to deviate and act differently from the collective, we can actually end up having quite the impact, not just on ourselves, but actually on the collective itself, both in the metaphysical sense of changing the balances and the scales in Shemayim, but also in the eventual physical behavioral change of others who might follow our lead. Today happens to be the yahrzeit of a great man in Jewish history who is one of my heroes, and that is Janusz Korczak. I started to learn about Janusz Korczak at a very young age. Already in elementary school, I was tasked to do a project about him, and eventually became quite interested in the details of his life. Janusz Korczak, as many of you know, was the head of an orphanage in Warsaw during the Holocaust. He was an important contributor to the arts, to education, to pedagogy, as well as a person who was very well regarded in society. And despite being given many opportunities to leave the 192 orphans which he cared for behind and actually be saved and escape the clutches of the Nazis in Europe to go to America or elsewhere, he decided to remain with those 192 orphans which he cared for and give them as normal a life as possible, as positive a life as possible, even until the moment when they boarded the trains to Treblinka, where unfortunately they were all killed. I think that Janusz Korczak in his life and the trajectory that he made for himself embodies both the Vilna Gaon and the Kliyakar to a T. He saw, as the Vilna Gaon explains, that the direction of his society, of his world, was not the one of blessing, was not the correct one, and he decided to act differently. In a society where things were devolving into immorality and into every man for himself, every woman for herself, he decided to act differently and to raise himself up to a higher moral level in which he could care for others and simply do the right thing. By doing so, his singular actions and decisions, in this case to deviate from the behavior of society, actually, as the Kliyakar points out, ended up elevating those around him and having an impact upon them as well. By his decisions to remain with the children, by his decisions to stand up to the Nazis, by his decisions to protect the life that he was giving to those orphans, he actually influenced others to do the same. He influenced others to act morally. He influenced others to take part in the monumental effort to provide a real and sacred life for those children and elevate their lives until their dying moments. In many ways, he embodies Reeh Anochi Nosein Lifnechem Hayom, Bracha Uklala. He embodies the idea that Reeh, as an individual, you have to sometimes look discerningly at the behaviors of those around you. But that behavioral path that you eventually choose, the one of blessing and positivity, can be lifnechem, can have an impact on all those around you to elevate everyone to the better path and ultimately bring about greater blessing in our world. It's a path that we should be inspired to follow. It should be a path that we should try to follow as best we can, hopefully become successful and not only elevating and improving ourselves and finding the bracha and finding the blessing, even amidst times that are challenging and moments that are challenging, but also help others to do the very same. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom.